going to keep reading on Banner in the Sky, page 8. Now he was moving on again. He came to a stream, stopped and drank. A furry marmot watched him from a nearby boulder, whistled shrilly, and disappeared. High above, a giant hawk whirled slowly through the still blue air. Beyond the stream was a fork in the path. The right-hand branch, plain and well-trodden, led off toward the Dornelberg and the Wunderhorn, two of the most popular peaks for climbing in the district. But it was not this branch that Rudy followed. Bearing left, he moved on along a barely visible trail that climbed upward toward the base of the citadel. He was above tree line now. Even the dwarf pine and shrubs were gone. All grass and moss were gone. And the earth was a bare sweep of gravel and tumbled boulders. Among the boulders, the going was tricky, for he had no proper nailed mountain boots, but his feet were nimble, his balance true, and making deft use of his self-made staff, he climbed quickly and easily. When after an hour he turned and looked back, the rocky point where he had stopped to eat seemed almost as far below him as the village. The world into which he had now come was one of stillness and desolation. There was the gray of rock, the white of snow, the blue of sky, and that was all there was. The only movement anywhere was that of his own body, the only sound the scraping of his own feet against the boulders. Yet Rudy was not conscious of loneliness. He was too used to being alone for that. Every one of the perhaps 50 times during the past 2 years that he had climbed up to the Citadel's glaciers, he had been alone, and he was now as familiar with this world and as at home in it as in the valley below. Pausing now and then, he stared at the mountain that towered gray and monstrous above him. Most of the people in the town believed it was the home of demons who would destroy anyone who ventured onto its forbidden slopes. Well, maybe. But he, Rudy, was not yet within a mile of the mountain itself, and if any demons did, indeed, come down into the foothills, they would do so, he was certain, only under cover of night. He looked up, and the sun was bright and golden in the zenith. The thin finger of cold that for an instant had touched him dwindled and was gone. The slope steepened. The boulders grew larger. He had come to the terminal moraine of the Citadel's glacier, the great mass of tumbled, broken rock which all ice sheets push and grind them in their slow descent. Can you put that down, please? 10 more minutes brought him to the top of the moraine, and now the glacier spread before him, or more accurately, 2 glaciers, for he had come out at a point facing the Kirtle Ridge of the Citadel, where its northern and eastern ice streams met and joined. And the one on the north, which was broader, rose to the pass between the Citadel and the Dornelberg, and was known as the Dornell Glacier. What is the one that nobody has climbed?
Matterhorn.
Yeah. No, I just started. The eastern one, called the Blue Glacier, was the steeper and climbed like a giant stairway to the saddle, or col, near the base of the Citadel's southeastern ridge. Beyond this col, which is spelled C-O-L, invisible from where he stood, still another glacier dropped away on the south side of the mountain toward the valley and village of Broly. Rudy had ascended both glaciers. He had been to Broly. No less than 5 times, indeed, he had completely circled the base of the Citadel, climbing up one glacier and down another, traversing the cols and lower ridges, threading his way through the deep, trackless gorges beneath the mountain's western face. He had stared upward until his neck ached and his eyes swam. He had studied every ridge and cliff and ice wall and ledge and chimney that could be seen from below. He knew more about the approaches to the Citadel than any guide in Kirtle, and yet he still did not know enough. Still he kept coming up to the glaciers to stare again, to study, to measure. To do this, he had played truant from school, even from church. Now he was running out on his job. Always it meant tears and pleas from his mother, often harsh words from his Uncle Franz, but he did not care. He kept coming back. Nothing in heaven or earth could have held him from coming back. This time he was up to the Blue Glacier. He had not particularly planned to, and just why he picked the Blue rather than the Dornell he could not have said. Later, thinking back to that day, he racked his memory for some sign, some motive or portent that had been the reason for his choice. But he could never find one. He simply crossed the junction of the 2 ice streams, bore left, and climbed on toward the south, and his destiny. Like all glaciers, the Blue was cut through by crevices, deep splits and chasms, caused by the pressures of the slow-moving ice. When hidden by snow, these could be great hazards to climbers. But on this midsummer day, no snow had fallen in some time. The crevices were plain to view, and there was no danger if one kept his eyes open and paid attention. Rudy zigzagged his way carefully upward. On the ice, of course, his smooth-soled shoes were even worse than on the boulders. But by skillful balancing and use of his stick, he kept himself from slipping. As he climbed, a black dot came into view on the high coal head. This was an old hut built many years before the first explorers of the mountain, but now abandoned and all but forgotten by the people of the valleys. Rudy had twice spent nights there during his circuit of the citadel, and he knew it well. But it was not there, especially, that he was going now. He was not going anywhere specifically, but only climbing, watching, studying. Every few paces now he would stop and stare upward, motionless. The east face of the citadel rose above him like a battlement. Cliff upon cliff, it soared up the glacier, its rock bulging and bristling, its walls veined with long streaks of ice. Far overhead, he could see a band of snow, which marked the mountain's first setback. Beyond it, the sloping walls disappeared for a space, only to bulge out again higher up, incredibly higher up, in a great gray thrust against the empty sky. So vast was it, so steep, so mighty, that it seemed more than a mere mass of rock and ice, more than a mere mountain. It seemed a new world rising up out of the old world that was its mother, a world with a life and a meaning of its own, beautiful and menacing, beckoning and unknown. But it was not of beauty or terror that Rudy Matt was thinking as he gazed up at it now from the blue glacier. It was of a deep cleft, wide enough for a man's body, that slanted up the rock wall before him and ended, of a series of ledges broad enough for a man's feet that rose one above another toward the high belt of snow and petered out. His eyes searched up and down, to the right and to the left. He climbed on, stopped and studied the next section of the face, and then he climbed on again. He moved through absolute silence. Later in the day, when sun and melting snow had done their work, great rock and ice masses would break loose from the heights above and come roaring down the mountainside. But it was still too early for this. The citadel rose up like a tower of iron. There was no movement anywhere, no stirring, no sound. And then there was a sound. Rudy stood motionless. It was not the sound of a mountain, of falling rock and ice. It was a voice. He waited. He looked around him. Every sense was straining, but he saw nothing. Nothing moved. It was his imagination, he thought, a trick of the mind or of the stillness, or was it? And now the cold finger of fear touched him again. Was it the voice of a mountain demon? He stood without breathing, and the sound came again. It seemed at the same time to come from nearby and far away. He waited. Once more it came, and then suddenly he knew where it came from. It was from beneath the ice, from a crevice in the glacier. He approached the nearest crevice and called out, but there was no answer. He went on a second, no answer. Again he waited and listened, and again the voice came faintly. Straight ahead was a third chasm in the ice, and advancing cautiously, he peered over the edge. And that's the end of chapter 1.